Thanks for joining us. We're excited to be here and talk about the grant, but I am with my colleagues, Sarah and Holly. Holly, you want to say hey?
Hi, everybody. I'm Holly Herrick. I'm head of film at Austin Film Society. I'm so glad to see you all. This is our favorite time of year administering the grant. It's been central to our program at AFS for 25 years, and we're just thrilled to be opening it up for submissions. Hi.
Yeah, so what we'll do tonight is go over just kind of the basics. A lot of this information you can find on our website if you haven't seen it already. This is also a great time to ask questions, so feel free to do that in the chat as it comes. We'll stop after a couple of sections and check back in. Sarah's going to interrupt and give us questions in real time, hopefully. There are a lot of you in the room, so hopefully we'll get to all the questions, but feel free to ask them in the chat. And if there's anything that we miss, you'll have opportunities to, via email, we can follow up. I think the next slide, Sarah, just so that they know what the process is, we do have two other webinars coming up. We're going to be covering basically the same information, but with different focuses. So if you came to this one and maybe have a narrative project, the next one will have more relevant maybe examples and questions for narrative filmmakers, and the same on the 24th with documentary filmmakers. You don't have to go to the these if you already get all the relevant information from this. This is really just our general overview. And I'm sure there are a mix of you documentary and narrative filmmakers in the room. So we'll have those examples, but those two are other opportunities, and feel free to come back if you'd like. Again, questions during the process can go to Filmmaker Support, and please make sure to go there with your questions and not to individual emails, because that's where we can consolidate them and make sure we're catching them. And then just through the process, after we announce the winners of the grant, you can request feedback for the projects. And I know that some of you probably have applied before and have requested feedback. Feedback takes a little bit more time, since this is the team that does the feedback. You're looking at us and pulling all that information. So it does take a little bit of time, but you are going to be able to request feedback after the process. So that's not changed. The other thing is a lot of this presentation may look similar if you've applied before or have come to one of these. And that's the good news. There's not a whole lot that has changed, but there have been a couple of little tweaks here and there. And this is a time for us to tell you about them. So next slide. So hopefully there's some new folks. I don't recognize everyone in the room, but hopefully if you're new to us, just a little bit about the organization. We were established in 1985 by filmmaker Richard Linklater, really with the purpose of making great film and independent filmmaking accessible in Texas. So there are a number of ways we do that. One is through our art house theater, AFS Cinema, which we are looking forward to reopening soon. And then our AFS studios, our Austin studios, the 160,000 square foot film production facility, kind of in the Mueller neighborhood, Old Mueller Airport. Our filmmaker support programs, such as this grant and production space, and other sponsored projects, other ways that we do that through the filmmaker support program, our Community Media Center, Austin Public, where we have classes and equipment access. And then the Texas Film Awards, if anybody has heard of that, we present the annual Texas Film Awards, and that really raises funds and awareness to the programs and the filmmakers. Next slide. So the grant itself began in 1996, and over $2 million in cash grants have been awarded, and $340,000 in kind goods and services. And we've supported about 425 filmmakers. And we do fund shorts and feature-length documentaries, narratives, experimental films, and animated films. This is the round for feature films. We have a shorts round, and we'll talk about that a little too. It's intended for emerging filmmakers. And what we mean by emerging is basically half of our support does go to new makers that are maybe the first or second time, but we also think about supporting more experienced filmmakers who need the support at very important parts of their project, important moments in their project. So, experienced filmmakers wouldn't really come to us if they didn't really need the support for a particular phase of their production or phase of their project. So even though it's intended for emerging filmmakers, you might see some more noted names in the filmmaking industry who get grants. It is competitive. So there are over 200 applications each year, and it grows. Usually each round we see 100 or so applications, and we definitely got more than that last round, almost 150 at the shorts round last time. And about 20 to 25 folks get funding annually. We just don't have enough money to go around, and wish we did, and we're continuing to find ways to get more money in the hands of filmmakers, but it is pretty competitive. And it was formerly known as the Texas Filmmaker Production Fund. So if you ever see TFPF, it's the same grant. Next slide. Here are a couple of just kind of recently funded projects that you may be familiar with. Actually, the first one, the In Between, is a documentary in production. Robbie Flores's film. She just recently received an ITVS Open Call Award for this film, so it is in production. And then Bull, Annie Silverstein's project, was funded in 2019 and obviously premiered last year, or gosh, 2019 now, not last year, but 2019 at Cannes. I was nominated for several Independent Spirit Awards recently, and she just received a Guggenheim Fellowship, which is really exciting. So we have a lot of kind of emerging and more experienced filmmakers who have received the grant at some point. Next slide. So the grant cycle, as I said, we are in what we call the spring application cycle. And that opened Monday the 12th, and the deadline is June 4th, so Friday, June 4th. We're looking at feature-length projects, and we define that as 40 minutes or over, and they can be documentary, narrative, experimental, any phase of production, which is pre-production, production, and post-production. And also this year, we're opening it up to development. Last year, we had a separate grant for development projects, and this year we sort of put it together in the same grant, and we will be looking at development support for feature-length projects. The development side is really intended for filmmakers who have a track record of completed work, and we'll talk a little bit more about what you need to show in applying for a development grant. The fall application cycle, which will probably launch sometime in July with a September deadline, is for short projects. And again, short projects would be under 40 minutes or under is what we will define that as. So if yours is actually, if you want to apply for a shorts project instead of a feature, some of this may apply to you. You may want to wait until later on for another webinar around the shorts application. Next slide. And so what you can apply for? So we have two components to our grant, which is cash and in-kind. So for production, you can apply for up to $15,000 in cash to fund any stage of production. Again, pre-production, production, and post-production. This caps at $3,000 for projects in distribution. And so we kind of stick distribution kind of at the tail end of production when we talk about this, but there is a cap for distribution. And those cash awards can also be kind of put into two categories. You could qualify for the New Texas Voices grant, which is $10,000 and consultation for first-time filmmakers of color, traditionally from traditionally underrepresented communities, or the North Texas Pioneer Film Grant, which is for emerging filmmakers who reside in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, again with an emphasis on underrepresented perspectives. If you qualify for either of those, please check the boxes. There'll be boxes to check for that. But in general, you can just apply for up to $15,000 in cash.
I have a quick clarifying note on New Texas Voices. That's for a first-time feature-length filmmaker. So if you've made short films, you absolutely, but have not completed a feature, you absolutely can apply for New Texas Voices if you qualify otherwise.
Great, thank you. Yes, for first time, this will be for the first time feature. And then in terms of development, if you select development, you can receive $5,000 for projects at that stage. And it's just kind of a set amount in terms of like what we would be giving to development. So you're not going to be requesting up to 5,000, you would just be requesting $5,000 for your development support. One big caveat here, same as last year, which is that you cannot apply for both production and development, even if it's for different projects. And we have a couple, statistically, it doesn't help you, as we've found, if you apply with multiple projects. In fact, people who have applied with multiple projects really haven't gotten the grant. And just in terms of being able to spread the resources as far as we can with the limited amount of money, we just really feel like if you're going to apply for development, that you shouldn't apply for production, and vice versa. And we'll talk a little bit more about that selection after. Next slide. In-kind wise, we have two wonderful sponsors who continue to sponsor us year after year. MPS, Camera and Lighting Package. You can apply for up to $10,000 in production rentals. And then Stuck on DCP. So it awards a theatrical DCP package for 2 different features. And that may be theatrical, documentary, or narrative up to 100 minutes. And each of these awards have specific guidelines, and you can see that in our information. But these can be, you could request these above and included in your request for cash grants. So it does not count in the up to $15,000. It can be in addition to that, if you feel like you could use either of these things at the phase of the project that you're actually applying for.
It does not hurt your application to apply for everything you need. In fact, most of the people who receive the in-kind grants are also awarded cash along with the in-kind grants. It's not typically one or the other. Sometimes it is, but it won't hurt you to apply for everything.
Sarah, you want to take this one?
Yeah. So eligibility, you must be a resident of Texas since June 1st, 2020. That is going to be twofold on the application. So basically we're going to say you are a resident, you've been a resident since this date, and you'll check that. And then for a proof of residency, which I'll get into later, it will show a current bill or something that shows that you are still in that residence. Applicant must be the principal creative author of the work, which is the director. You can request funding for production, for pre-production, production, and post-production, or for distribution support, or for development support. Erica went over that a little bit. Distribution is capped at $3,000. If applying for production, projects may only receive 2 grants. Projects should apply for different stages of the production. So if you have applied with a project before and you have received a grant for pre-production for your project, you cannot again apply for pre-production for that same project. You would have to apply for production or post-production. And again, you cannot apply for both development and production support, even if it's for different projects. So what's not eligible for grants would be commercials, music videos, promotional, instructional, educational films, PSAs, or ongoing episodic work. Yes, was there a caveat for ongoing episodic work? I think if it can stand alone as its own principal work, then you can apply with that. But if it's in a series, you cannot apply for that. Did I explain that correctly?
Yes, and just to clarify also that the budget and the proposal that you are submitting is for that standalone piece of work. So it's not for the whole series. And we don't want to see a treatment for the whole series. We don't need to see a treatment or a budget for the whole series. It is just for what you feel like could stand alone. The other caveat is I know that documentary films are sometimes seen as having an educational market or maybe somewhat instructional. We just mean that that is not its first use, that your documentary isn't made for an educational market or an instructional video, that the documentary itself is artistic and maybe it's used in the educational market, but that is not the primary use of the documentary or the primary goal of the documentary. That's a question that we always get.
Does anybody have any questions about eligibility before we keep going? Okay, I don't see anything. Great.
Okay. So just the basics. Again, the application is open. So we've seen people in it already, so that's great. The submission deadline is Friday, June 4th by 6 p.m. Central. And we kind of pushed, for those of you who've seen this before, we usually say 5, but we know that we have folks who are on Mountain Time now these days. So we figured let's give them till 5. So we will have this open till 6 p.m. Central Time on Friday. And it's really important because we have to process all of these applications. So please don't wait until Friday to submit your application, because we always find technical difficulties happening at those last couple of hours of submission. So please don't get stuck Friday afternoon. You will be notified by September 2021 of the outcome. And the reason we don't let you know throughout the process, as we'll explain, is that your application pretty much is still in play the whole way through. And so we can't really give you any real data about or conclusive information about your application until all of the final selections are made. And we'll talk about the process and you'll see why. So I know that sometimes people are like, I haven't heard anything. What's going on? June, July. Please be patient. We do let everyone know. If you have any significant changes to your project or some news that you think might support your project, like maybe you got another big chunk of money from someplace else, or you have a cast, somebody you secured for your cast, or a great editor on, those are the kinds of information or updates we'd love to hear about, and that could help in the process. But really, we won't be communicating out where you are in the process until the very end. And at that time, when we do make the announcements, we will make the money available. So that happens really quite quickly. And again, you can request feedback on your project. That doesn't happen as quickly, again, because we're just processing all of that information, but you will get feedback if you request it, and only if you request it. Questions about that? Okay. Next slide. And so again, review process, what gets picked? We don't have any typical projects. We have different panelists who are involved every year, both from the first round and our actual panelists, which is great. It's a good thing. So fresh eyes on the project. And again, good projects get turned down all of the time, and we really mean it. It's sometimes heart-wrenching, and there's a lot of great conversation, and hopefully that reflects back in the feedback. But there isn't anything specific we are looking for in terms of type of projects, and it can vary round by round what people are really interested in or what sort of rises to the surface. Next. And then there were 2 rounds of review before we kind of come up with that panel. And the first round is really looked at by who we call sort of local participants. So each application is looked at by 2 reviewers, and those reviewers are really people from around Texas. The Texas filmmakers, industry professionals, programmers at festivals, and they are really engaged in supporting independent film. They are excited about the process, and so they are really looking at the first round, and they surface sort of the ones that they feel should go on to final consideration. And those that's about half of the review group. They'll go to what we call sort of semi-finalist round, and that's through the panelists. Next slide. And so the panelists, again, these are from outside of Texas, and these are invited filmmakers. They have expertise in either, documentaries or narratives. They're great festival programmers who you will know. And then they look at the semifinalist round of projects and then advance for a panel conversation about another third of those. And that is who our finalists are. And they really get together as a group to make the decisions on which projects to fund and how much to fund them based on your request and what's available. So they are actually making the final decisions. And then just, in terms of who our last year's panelists were, we had Betty Gordon, Dilcia Barrera from Sundance, and then filmmaker Christina Cho. So, I mean, I think it's, we have a nice wide range of independent filmmakers and programmers from around the country who participate.
We had a couple of questions, which I'll just hop in with quickly so we can ask, because they're all sort of related to eligibility. So a great question from Meryl about paying employees sort of after the fact. So let's say you apply for production, but the money that you're applying for has to be spent over the summer when you're shooting. That's fine. You can still apply for those and either reimburse yourself or your credit card or whatever, however you're actually spending the money. It doesn't have to, your timeline for receiving the grant from us doesn't have to be in line with your actual production timeline, as long as that's where you're going to apply the funds. It's a very good question and one we get every year. So thanks for asking about that. And please follow up if that wasn't clear. And then just in terms of just really clarifying that in-kind, what an in-kind grant is it's not cash, it is a certificate for services. So that's what we're offering from MPS for production services and also from Stuck On for DCP. So you can receive in-kind awards and also up to $15,000 cash, but you will not receive more than $15,000 cash. So you should not apply for more than $15,000 cash. And when we get to the budget form, it'll be more clear about how you tell us where your resources are coming from and how you make your request.
Great. Just keep the questions coming. The application form, hopefully you've all seen it. It's accessible online. What we recommend is for you to download and read the instructions and tip sheets first. And this has all of the stuff that we're covering in more detail and also some tips about like writing some of the components. So please read that first. And then you can look, we have a couple of really great samples from funded filmmakers who've sort of volunteered to have their application that was funded by AFS as an example for you. Please don't cut and paste anything, just use that as reference. And then you can apply on the link. Next slide, just so that you know you can save as you go along, and we recommend that you do. And to do that, you must sign up for an account to our platform. Please do not, just make sure you're not opting out of email communications, because that is how we are going to let you know what the final decisions are. If there are any other important information that we need to get to all applicants, we usually go through this process. And so if you have opted out of email communications, you won't get it. And it typically happens to a couple people each round that they never received an email, and that's likely why that has happened. Please name the form after your project. So there's a couple of naming conventions we'll go through. Again, you can save and come back to it. And we recommend that you do at least kind of sign on to the application so you could see what the application entails, because there are a couple places where you need to upload some things. So, please go there to look at it, and also feel free to save it as you go along. And then submit once you feel like everything is complete. And you can only submit once. You can't make changes after you submit, and it gets harder for us to go back and look for your application and switch things out or fix things for you. Typically, we just don't have the time to do that. So it would really be important for you to just hit submit when you're ready to do so, and you feel like everything's in place. And if there is any issue with any of that, the tech or not knowing if you've submitted or not, it generates a message that you have submitted. So that's one way you'll know. But if you're unsure, if you actually hit submit and you didn't get any messages, please let us know at Filmmaker Support and we can find out that for you.
There is another question. For local review of applications, is there a system in place to avoid bias?
Yes, so we do have a process by which they have to declare any conflicts of interest. So, and that happens across any grant, and certainly with out of town grant reviewers as well. That if there are projects that they have any specific interest in, whether it's a role or they've worked with this person before and don't feel, even if they don't feel like they can give it sort of an objective review, they can opt out and should opt out. And we try to switch that application with somebody else. So we are really conscious of that. You know, Texas is a small film community. You've talked to somebody at some point, or you may know of somebody, but we do make sure that people can feel good about giving anybody a review. And if they don't feel like they can give an unbiased review, we do allow them to opt out.
So answering Pepe's question is, if the grant, if the grant is given in September, when is the final film due? We don't have a required due date. Everybody's on a different timeline. We funded documentaries that are on like 10-year production timelines. So we don't have a specific time. We just ask that you keep us informed about the grant, or sorry, about the project that you receive funds for, and just check in with us and let us know where you are in production, especially if you make major advances. And also when the film is finished, we do require that you send us a copy of the movie. And we require that you put your laurels, our logo on the finished film in the credits.
Just want to, on top of that, for the development grant, though, we do require a status report a year after. So just a status report. If you're if you're applying for the development grant specifically, we do want a one-page status report on how the project is going. There is another question.
Yeah, those naming conventions, we should actually change that. That's not a requirement, Lori, that if you can't do an underscore on Vimeo, it's great if you can include the name of your video connecting with your application, but you don't need to worry about that.
Yeah, I definitely don't need to worry about that. I'll be looking at and testing all the links. So definitely don't need to worry about that. I've had some issues when people do try to do that naming convention and then the link just does not work and it's broken, and I'll have to contact you and we'll just, so yeah, don't worry about that.
Next slide. And so here, just so that you can see where you can choose on the first page of your application, production and development. By choosing one of those, it will drop down to the components that you have to complete for the application, and they're different for production and development, and we're going to talk through those components next. But just so that you can see that this is the place where you do have to choose one and not both. All right, so we'll talk about video next. Holly.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to jump in to talk about video sample. So I'm going to talk about all the different components of the application. The video sample is the most important part of the application because this is what shows us what your voice is from a filmmaking perspective. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this and answering questions. And we do have a sample to share with you that was submitted by a filmmaker that we're going to share in just a minute. So we do require that you make your link downloadable. This avoids a lot of trouble on our end in terms of when links expire, or or for example, when our panelists are reviewing and might not have good internet access. It's especially this year, it was very challenging with COVID and people being all spread out and not being able to work from the office. So we are now requiring that you make them downloadable. Your video sample should be up to 6 minutes in running time. And that is what allows us to keep all of the applications kind of apples to apples. And our panelists and reviewers are going to see the same amount of work in that primary video sample. This should not be a trailer. Do not submit a trailer or a teaser of your film. And the reason for that is we need to get a feeling for what the pace and the aesthetic of the film actually is. And as we know, trailers sort of conform to a very similar storytelling aesthetic. And what we want to see is actual work from the film and your directing style. And we ask that you do not switch out or update the work sample. You can get in touch with us if you're like, there's something I want to update about it. Please get in touch with us and we'll talk to you about it. But what usually happens is that original link no longer works. And it's usually at the point we're at a time sensitive review with our panelists. And that basically just means that they don't get to see your work. And that can be a huge problem in the review for you and for your application. So the best course of action is just having the link ready by the deadline, making sure that link works and keeping that link live until September. That's what we need from you, and it should be downloadable too. So let's advance to the next slide and we can talk a little bit more about what you can submit. So we say, something that will give the best flavor of the project. And we know that everybody has different access here depending on where you are in your in production with your particular project. So the best, if you haven't shot anything, you're going to submit previous work, and it should be previous work that you've directed. This has happened before where AFS has funded filmmakers who have never directed something. And what we're looking for there is a work from a member of your production team. And of course, it is much preferred to have something that you've directed, because as the applicant, we really need to see your voice. If you can't do that, think about who is on your team and if there's work that could, from their previous work that could show what you're going to do, or even if it's sample footage from this upcoming film, anything that you can submit that will give us the best flavor of the project. And if you do have work from the proposed project, we highly recommend that you send it. It can just raise questions in review of why we're not seeing it. If we're seeing in the application that you've shot something, but then it's not showing up as something that we can view. They're like, why wouldn't they submit that? And we have no sense of what this is, and they're already far enough along, we should be able to see something. So you don't want to raise questions about your application with what you choose to submit. You just want to support your case. So if you've shot anything and you can give us, the look and feel of the project, and give us maybe even a test interview scene of somebody who's definitely going to be a subject in your documentary is great. And if the footage is really rough from your new film, then we suggest that you give us a few minutes of what you've shot, and then maybe a few minutes from a previous project that's all polished and beautiful. The other option is we also allow you to submit additional supporting material. So a really great tactic could be submitting 6 minutes of work from the current project, and then a full feature or short that you've made previously as your additional supporting material. And we actually don't have a time limit on that additional supporting material, so you can submit anything in that category. And we highly encourage you to put previous work in that additional supporting material. They will look at it. They're not required to watch the whole thing. They are required to watch the full 6-minute sample, and they're required to look at your additional supporting material, but not necessarily watch the full feature. But we highly recommend it. It almost always helps and supports the application to have more work there.
There's a few questions. One was, my director would have to apply, not me as the producer, right? And that is correct. Yes, the director has to apply.
And if you are, as producer, are doing all the paperwork for the project, that's great. You just need to make sure your director is in the applicant space, and that your director must be a resident of Texas. And they're the ones that would be receiving the funds. But as producer, you can of course do all the paperwork and do the work of submitting, and you can even put your name in the contact. But we do have to have contact with the director as well, because they're going to be the ones receiving the funds.
Next question. I'm aiding in the support of submitting an anthology feature that has multiple directors on board. What would be the best way to go about the 6-minute video outside of a MASH/trailer/teaser?
This is great. Tyra, awesome. We love that you're doing an anthology. That's great. And that is tricky. But I would definitely use the additional support to try and get something from each of those directors. And I think it probably just depends on what you have. For the 6-minute sample, like if you guys have already shot something, or if you have like a little bit of footage from one of the directors, or if there's like any shorts that anybody's made that's like, this is kind of the basis, this is the look and feel. But I would definitely be judicious, and you know, you don't have to have all of those directors in the 6 minutes. I would bump you know, showing more of everybody's work to the additional supporting, and kind of pick the most representative work to put in that 6-minute sample, if that makes sense. Does that help?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's perfect.
Awesome.
Great. Next question. Is it an advantage providing screenwriting awards for a submitted project?
So you've won, assuming you've won a screenwriting award for the project that you're submitting to us, you would, is that the question? Did I understand that?
I think so.
There's a place to include that in your application.
Yeah.
So you would be, when you do your project description, and we'll talk through this in a minute, there's a way to indicate sort of what has happened with the project so far. And if you're applying for development, we would specifically want to know where the project has been.
Great. Does the additional video support material need to be a downloadable link as well?
It does not. That would be preferred, but it does not. Just the 6 minutes. That's the main requirement.
Great. I'm a film teacher with young people, and my supplemental materials, aside from the 6 minutes, would be films my kids made under my supervision. I definitely directed them, although I am not credited and they do not showcase my ability/style. Is that appropriate material to submit?
You know, if it showcases your abilities and style, that's great. And then I would just make clear, as with everything you submit, make clear what it is that you're submitting. I think it's always preferred if you do just have more directorial material to submit. We would rather see more directorial material from you. But if this, if you want to explain to us why this supports your cause, of course it would be acceptable, and we would just need to know what we were seeing. And I think as always, like, what you're trying to do is make a case for funding. So whatever you submit in video should really support these panelists saying, you know what, that's the project we need to fund. So the strength of the material, your abilities, your ability to finish a film, which we all know is a Herculean feat, is what they're looking for. Like, sort of not necessarily just proof of concept, but your ability to execute, and your unique voice and vision is critical. So
I was gonna say, Holly,
sorry,
to your point, for each video that you submit, there is a box for you to describe what it is that we're seeing. And it is important to use that box to tell us whether it's something you've directed, something you've, you know, again, how this applies to support your proposal. Please use that, because we'd hate to have questions, and this happens typically if there isn't really good information in that box. There's a lot of guessing that happens when you look at a project or a sample, and we just don't want that guessing to happen. We want them to know exactly what they're seeing and why they're seeing it in relationship to your project that you're proposing.
There is a question about budget, but I am going to wait until we start going over the budget, and we can answer that for you. And then there's one more question, then we'll go ahead and go into the video sample. But does it just having a script count as development, or do you all need budget sheet, cast, proposal, etc.?
So yeah, Erica, you might want to answer this one, but the requirements for the development are different than the requirements for the production grant. But we want to reiterate that if you can apply for production, you should, particularly if you don't have a significant body of work. So if you haven't made, like, let's say 4 short films or 1 feature film previously that you're going to show us, if you've made a minimum of 1 feature film and let's say 3 to 4 short films, that's a good way of knowing that we're looking for you on the development grant. If you don't have a lot of previous work, we really want to see your application in the production area. The development grant is highly competitive with people who have a body of work, and production is where we typically fund people who are getting AFS funding for the first time. So we would steer you towards the production grant, which does require that you have a budget and the other materials. The development grant is has fewer requirements, but again, we really want to see that you should have significant past work to submit.
Right, and at the point that you have a script, a final script, you probably want to be applying for pre-production expenses at that point. So getting ready to kind of get your film and your script ready to go into production. So that's what you would be applying for, the pre-production piece of that.
There's one more question that was sent to me directly about sort of, I'm looking for an editor. And so I'm sending in footage that doesn't have a professional editor, and then I'm going to be applying for an editor. That's a very consistent story. And I think that's something that our panelists would understand when they see, okay, there's something missing from this, but we know we're going to get that if we fund this project. So, so I think, do your best and just be clear and make the case that, you think and show that you think this footage could really improve with a professional editor. And so the next thing is this, we do have a sample. So this was submitted, this is not available online. This is something that was submitted last year from filmmakers who did not have a finished rough cut of their film, but they had some scenes to show us. And so they submitted this in addition to previous work. So a couple things about this. They managed to give us mood and tone. They had enough dialogue that we were able to hear that the line delivery was really effective, that there were some compelling performances. Obviously, it's beautifully shot. They were able to show that the casting was really effective. We could see, we got to see those faces. We got to see some of those reactions. If I were to have given them feedback, I would have said, it would be great if we could see some of these scenes play out a little more. We're looking for less of a mood reel and more of like, if some of those scenes had just stuck around a little bit longer, but they just weren't there yet with their edit. They didn't have any fully cut scenes. They had their footage and they cut this together, and it worked enough to make we were compelled enough by that, and the panel was compelled enough by seeing that they managed to capture tone and performance, that they were able to watch the previous material, which was a previous film, and that made the case for them ultimately. So that is one example of what you can do. And again, the more that you can, if they had a completed scene that was edited from start to finish, I would have recommended that they submit that rather than just the mood reel. But this was effective, and so it just depends on where you are in your edit. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful. And yes, it is. This is a little bit trailer-esque. And again, that's why we would have given them that feedback, but they managed to get some performance in there. And they did manage to get a little more mood than a typical trailer, and enough dialogue that we were able to get a sense of the writing. So it was, enough in this case. Definitely, scenes are always preferred as much as possible. And sorry, that's confusing.
Yeah, and I think that the idea that they call this a teaser instead of a trailer, this film is out and it did premiere, and this would not be considered a trailer for that film. There was nothing that pointed to narrative necessarily, and I think trailer editing is about like condensing the narrative as much as you can. So I do think that there's a fine line, but yeah, I think when you see something like this at this length, particularly 2 minutes, you think, oh no, it's going to be a trailer, because it tries to communicate so much in that little bit of time. But I think this, as a teaser, communicated the most important things that the panelists and the reviewers are looking for in terms of mood, again, tone, mood and tone, and character, and then just the style, thinking about stylistically, how is this director approaching this film, I think is important.
Okay, so we are going to move on a little bit to the development requirements. So we can, we already talked a little bit about additional samples, but again, longer than 6 minutes, submit as additional supporting material. And we've got another space in the application where you can put that.
There was another question,
Great.
and this is basically answering. I just want to make sure it's read out loud and just confirmed. I filmed a short film as a proof of concept for the project I'm applying for, planning on using the 6-minute segment from the short as a primary video sample. Can I submit the full 15-minute short as my additional? And yes, you can. I just wanted to make sure.
That. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a great tactic as well, especially if it's a proof of concept for the feature. That's perfect. Yes. Great. Okay, so for the development grant, if anybody's applying for this, you can submit up to 5 links of past work, and we absolutely suggest that you use all 5 if you can. If you're a first feature-length filmmaker, which is possible to apply for with development, we need to see that you've directed a significant body of work. So that means, you know, you've done some indie TV or shorts or whatever you have done. And at minimum, you have to provide 2 samples of previously completed work. But we really do recommend that you kind of max that out if you can, if you've got the work. Of course, if you're like, oh, I've got 2 really strong films and then everything else I made when I was a freshman in college, I'd really rather not submit that. That's fine. You know, again, you're making the case. So, you know, maximize, send as much stuff as you can that shows your voice. If it's stuff that really doesn't show your voice and you want to leave it out, totally fine.
And these do not have to be downloadable links, just for clarification as well. Do not have to be downloadable.
Okay. So next slide. All right. So for the this is for the, did we skip ahead, Sarah? I'm sorry. Is this the next slide? Because this is for development, I think. All right, so just going into what the development attachments are, we need an artist statement from you, a project description, a CV or filmography, that PDF of up to 5 video samples, and your proof of residency. So these are the required attachments only for development.
And then for production, we need the project description, a budget summary cover form, project budget, project timeline, project personnel, and a treatment or script.
And you can see that on the right-hand side
Yeah.
of this page. Okay, so we're going to talk about the development artist statement, and I'll try to do this quickly because I think we've got a lot of people probably applying for production. So I'll just go through the next 2 really quickly. So this is about you as a filmmaker, where you're coming from. And these bullet points are just spot on. So the principles driving your artistic inquiry, where you're coming from and where you're headed creatively, and where this project fits into your artistic or career path. And that what the committee is evaluating is why this is the next best project for you. And this is different from what we're asking for the production grant, again, to be clear. So moving to the next slide, the project description, most projects in development might be writing a screenplay, so they don't exactly have the full story yet. So what we want to see from the project description is a statement of purpose, why this project is going to be worth all your time and energy and sweat equity over the next several years of your life. Why do you want to explore it? And how will the $5,000 grant be used? And this can really be anything. And we encourage you to just let us know what it needs to be. For a lot of the recipients last year, a lot of them were using it for time to write. It really did it paid for their time to be able to work on these projects. And so that is 100% a great reason for that $5,000. For other people who may be a little bit more advanced, they said, I really need to travel, or I really need to, at this point, hire or start looking for a producer or a casting director or whatever was going to advance the project. And the history of the project. So this is where, if you've won awards or you've been through a lab or whatever it is with this project, you would put that in the history of the project for development. So moving into production, this is where most of you will be putting all of the details of your project. This is really the main bulk of the writing of the application. And so this is probably what's going to take the most of your time, aside from putting together your video samples. And this is where you're going to make your case for funding. What we really encourage people to do is be very clear in that first paragraph. What is the film? Is it, oftentimes we'll get to the third paragraph and we don't know whether it's a documentary feature or a narrative feature. And so that's like the kind of clarity I'm looking for, just like basic, like make sure all the basic clarity is in that first paragraph, but also what is special, original, or exciting about the project. Make a thesis statement about why you're writing it and really hook us in with that first paragraph. And of course, this is a creative world. Be creative. If you show us your kind of storytelling in when you hook us and grab us. And do describe the tone of the work artistically. Describe your production plan. So that means, just give us an overview of how this project is going to get made, including the fundraising plan, and do a little bit of thinking about what this is for. And so when we talk about distribution strategy, and again, we say that the AFS grant, it really is for so many different types of projects, including experimental features that likely wouldn't be distributed by a typical distributor, but might play at a museum or might be part of a media project that lives on your website or that is in partnership with other organizations or museums. And so there's a lot. Your distribution strategy doesn't have to be one thing. I premiere at Sundance and then I saw the film. It really can be what's tailored to your specific film and your specific idea. And it might include, I want communities across the country to see this. So I'm going to include in my budget some impact producing dollars to be able to do a documentary tour. Really, whatever it is, that how is this movie going to meet the world? That's your distribution strategy. So we're not looking for something traditional. We're just looking for your ideas about the whole life of this movie and what you can give us in that in a couple of pages about what you're trying to do. And so we'll do a few quick tips, and these are all in those in the FAQ that Erica described. So one thing that can really derail an application in the review process is if there are details that are unsupported by other parts of the application. This is just a random example, but let's say your project is a documentary that requires a lot of travel and then there's no budget for travel, or let's say that it's going to require a lot of visual effects and there's no money in the visual effects in the budget. It's those types of things that can really throw off a reviewer. So making sure that everything that you talk about is sort of reflected in the timeline and reflected in the budget and reflected possibly in the video sample. If, for example, if we hear that you already have a rough cut and then we don't have any footage, that's something that can make reviewers question the project. Is it not good enough for us to see? It's just like any kind of questions they could come up with, they will. So you really want to, it's all about making that case and making sure that it's clear what you're up to and it's not raising questions, but kind of answering them. And so a good thing to do is have somebody else read your application who's not familiar with the project. And that means kind of giving yourself enough time before the deadline so that somebody can read it and give you feedback. And then just describe, why the AFS grant is important to the project is helpful too. And what we are hoping to is that our grant helps you with other grant applications. So sort of think through, why AFS grant funding is important, but also think through what is the case you want to make if you're writing this grant, and how will you go out to funders in general. Most of the same arguments should work with us as with other funders.
We have a question.
I'm going to sign off and give it back to Erica, unless there's anything else. And unless Erica, you want to jump in and say anything else about this.
I think Sarah, you said there was a question.
Yeah. For a project in post-production, we would still include all of this information, but just in the past tense for the production plan and fundraising plan, was the question.
I think I missed it. You said that the
Yeah, I'm a little confused. Sorry.
Yeah. So for a project in post-production, They would
Right.
still include all of the information, but just in the past tense.
Yeah, you would. And you would just, and basically you might not have to include as much detail because you're already at the point that you're at. So you would say like, so it's basically like, we're at this point, we fundraised through XYZ to get to this. In order to finish, we need XYZ, and this is our path, and this is where the AFS grant fits in. If you're just starting out, we might need more details, but yeah, if you're in post-production, it's great. We already have the proof in the pudding that you got to this point. So you don't need to spend as much time, but I would still kind of lay out where you are, where you've been and where you're going.
Right. Great. And then Lori, I saw your question earlier and I'm gonna address it in this next section about the budget. So hang tight. I saw it for sure. I think the next section is about the budget. So we're asking you to look at submit two pieces of the budget, which is our budget summary form. So that's a downloadable form that everyone has to fill out. And we'll show it to you in the next slide. But the second is your full budget. And that full budget can be in any format that you have it in. You can also download some samples that we have just to see how the full budget looks. But the reason why we want both is we also want to look at, make sure you're not forgetting anything, but the panelists are not going line by line, checking your budget. They're really looking about feasibility holistically. So your project, and does the budget and the components of the budget match, as Holly said, the proposal, and do they support each other? And is it feasible? Is it feasible to raise the money? So in that vein of feasibility, make sure that the budget summary form has all your funding sources, and that could be pending funding, so things that you have applied for besides AFS money, producer cash, things that you're going to be providing, any in-kind is also looked at. And then you want to provide the entire budget, not just the part that you're requesting. So again, if you're in post-production, as the example was, you don't want to just show us your post-production budget, you want to show us the whole budget, what you've raised and what you've raised so far. And then just make sure the math works, that your full budget equals what the budget summary is. Sometimes that's off. They don't automatically fill each other in. So please make sure that we're working with the same amount of numbers. So next slide shows us the budget summary form. So Lori, this in your case, the question is, does the panel still steer clear away from projects by new filmmakers that cost more than $500,000, even if they're working with investors to offset costs? It doesn't, the cost of your film and your experience typically doesn't matter in this case, as long as you can provide a budget that, one, is feasible, has all the components, and they can see that you've actually, if you have a $500,000 budget and you're applying, your funding plan shows very little activity in terms of how you're going to raise that $500,000, that's the concern, right? So if you haven't thought through a funding plan to raise money for your project, full project budget, that's what feasibility, when feasibility comes in and say, how feasible is this if this person has never raised funds before? They don't, maybe you don't have a producer on board. Maybe you don't actually have a plan, like in this resources part of the funding plan, budget summary, you don't have any anticipated costs that would reach $500,000 and any actual, those total expenses and those total resources should match, right? Even if you haven't secured them yet, this also helps us see that you're thinking about where else to find that money. And so you're also, with your fundraising plan in your project description, should also tell us. So if you have some investors that you're working with already, that's great. You can mention that and what percentage of that budget you feel like can be filled by that resource. Does that make sense? Thanks. But that's what we're really looking at when we're looking at the budget summary. And then the full budget is just line by line, making sure you've included all the necessary items and that it supports the project that you're proposing. Budget tips, we talked about that. Please use realistic numbers. So this is where you might want to do a little bit of research, market value. If you're shooting in Texas or in Austin, great. But if you're shooting a film in a different country or a different market, you may want to give us the numbers from that market. That's just much more realistic. If you've never done this before, that's why we have some of our examples on the website, but also just ask other folks, look at other budgets from other films. Again, this is also where we want to see where you will apply the monies from AFS that you're asking for. So it also helps us know, is this going to make a difference? Again, if you have a $500,000 budget and you're asking us for the full $15,000 in production, and that is the only money that you think you can raise, or that's on the potential anticipated to raise, how much money is that going to really, how much of a difference is that going to make if you're still trying to find up that under other $485,000? Maybe it's for development or pre-production, and really your pre-production costs cost $15,000, and it really is that's what's going to help you get into production. Maybe that's where you're applying those costs. So what you ask for and where you apply it makes a difference. I don't know, Holly, if you want to add anything to that, but.
That was very thorough.
Okay, because that's what, I know that's definitely what panelists and reviewers are looking for.
Yes.
Yeah, so just a couple questions. How do y'all decide how much of the budget is funded?
That's a great question. So because our grants are so limited, it's only up to $15,000. It's, it can be a tiny amount of your full funding, or if you have a very low budget film, it can be extremely impactful. And we've kind of fund the gamut. And one thing we are doing with the panel is making sure that there's really a diverse selection of projects. And that includes, from first-time directors and very new filmmakers. And typically, like last year, I think 80% of our grantees had not been funded before, as well as, people who clearly have more of a track record or have more experience. So, so it's not a consideration that it's like, I mean, let's say you have this insanely low budget film and they love it, and the 15,000 is like, let's say like a third of your budget. That's not a ding against you. It really is just what Erica was saying. Like the whole package has to be, has to make sense and has to be feasible, but it wouldn't be, if a greater percentage or less percentage of your budget wouldn't impact your funding. And I would say the exception to that would be if you have a very, very high budget film and there isn't a path, just like Erica was saying, there isn't a path to that $2 million. It might be hard to convince the panel to give 10,000 when you don't have a path to the 2 million.
Another question. A person's movie is going to be shot 95% across the border in Mexico. Does the money have to be used into the things that will be acquired in Texas, like hiring a sound, or can it be used in Mexico to pay for things?
Money can be used anywhere, right? So, and you don't have to, the other question we get related is, do you have to shoot your film in Texas if this is a Texas filmmaker fund? No, the film can be shot anywhere. The monies can be applied to anywhere that you shoot the film. Great. All right, next question, next slide. And I think we'll go through these pretty quickly, hopefully running out of time here. Project timeline. So we want to see the full production timeline. Even again, if some of this has been in the past, we want to see where you've been and we want to see where you're going, as Holly described. And again, feasibility. We're just looking at the timing you're giving yourself and how you've made it so far, how the markers that you've made it so far. So it can be very general. This is kind of a more basic project timeline. And the second, we have another example, is much more detailed, month by month. It can be in any format. It's just one page and you show us your timeline. Again, I think that questions around, what if we don't hit this timeline? This is an expected timeline. If you're going to veer drastically away from that, that's something that we can talk about after you've been either given the award, or if you want to update us because some significant event has happened that changes your timeline. That's an update that we could take back to panel if it helps support your project. But yeah, this is not you telling us this is exactly how you're going to finish this project. We know, and certainly with the pandemic, a lot of timelines have changed, and even from the moment you submit, it could change again, given the opportunities or the limited opportunities for shooting post-pandemic. So it's all good. We just want to know that you have a roadmap. Next page, next slide. project personnel, again, just for production, 1 page should be a bio of yourself and other attached personnel. And, you know, again, this should be for folks that are already secured on your project. If you are, you know, are early in the process, you're talking to people, you don't have a lot of secured folks, you can add them as potentials if they're truly potentials. So don't just give us a list of, you know, your hopes and dreams of folks that will work on your project if you really haven't even talked to them and they don't know anything about your project. But we know that, you know, depending on the stage you're in, you may not have secured that editor, but you're in conversations. Or another great thing for people who are new to filmmaking is also advisors. If you have an advisor you're working with who's been supporting you, supporting this project, that's great to put on personnel as well. We just want to know that you have a team and that you're being supported. Next page. So the treatment or script. So it is usually one or the other, not both. The treatment, again, describes the story of your movie. Documentary treatments might be a little bit longer in terms of storylines and character, some plot points, and a discussion of themes. You can, if you're a narrative feature, you can submit a treatment rather than a script. Rather than, even if you feel like your script is too early or in progress, we would prefer you submit the script if you're further along in your script development, if you're a narrative feature. It isn't a screenplay competition. We always have to say that because I think people are worried about that we're judging your script versus the application as a whole. We are really just judging the application as a whole. And you know, feel free to let us know in your project description what draft it is in. You know, if you still have to make some advancements in your script, that's cool too. But one or the other, treatment or script.
Okay, for proof of Texas residency, I alluded to this earlier, but you will check on the application that you have been a resident of Texas since June 1st, 2020. Then there will be a section where you can upload proof of residency. This is really important because I will message anyone if I need more proof. So basically, we don't accept driver's licenses, state IDs, passports. We don't need any of that. Voter registration card is great. A current voter registration card from this past year, not one from 2010 or 2011 like the sample says. A utility bill is great. If you want to redact any of the numbers on there, totally, I understand. Really what I'm looking for is your address, your name, and a current billing cycle to prove that you are still in that apartment or house. And then a certification of a Texas University enrollment is fine. If you are a full-time student attending a university in a different state, you are not eligible. You have to be full-time in Texas. I hope that, does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, great.
Yeah, so again, I think this confuses people, but it's important that Sarah is going to be looking through this. There is one person looking through this, so she will definitely get back to you if she can't find proof of two things, which is you're saying that you've been here before, so that's just the checkbox. You've been a resident for at least a year, and that you are currently a resident, and what proves that you're currently a resident.
Lori, on the tip sheet, oh, sorry, it says receipts are okay. So what we mean by that is it has to show your current address and the date. So anything that will have your address, your name, and the date is totally fine. Cool, great.
All right, next. All right, so additional support material. There is an option for you to send additional support material. This is optional, and in most cases, reviewers will look at it, but we're not requiring them to do so. So some things that are good to have are maybe letters of support, particularly if you're new, you haven't, you don't have a lot of experience or a lot of films to show. Letters of support are great to have from people you've worked with, people who are connected to the project. Sometimes letters of support are really great if you're, say, a documentary filmmaker and you want to show access, for example, to an estate or to a person. That's always really great to have. So it can also be somebody who you're working with, like I said, as a potential, if they're interested in coming on the project once it's funded to jump in as an editor or something, that's great too. But it could be in support of you or the project, or ideally both. And just one note about letters of support, we should not be getting them from the people who are supplying the letters of support. You should really have them send it to you and you submit with the rest of your materials. That's just one caveat. It's not like applying for a university or anything. It's just like you should be able to see those letters of support and it will be up to you to upload them. Okay, next slide. We're getting to the end, I promise. Other things, storyboards have been really helpful, particularly if you haven't shot anything. Storyboards, production design images, location photos, all really great to help us understand kind of the setting or any your vision, your creative vision. Press articles about work you've done before is great. Materials, just think about materials that would really support what you're proposing in terms of your own creative vision or the people around you that are helping you make this film. Don't send actor headshots, press kits or printed images, any production design or locations images if you already have that in a video sample. So like I said, location photos are great, but if you don't have anything to show us from currently of the current project. But if you have it in the video sample, don't do it as an additional. And again, DVDs of a work sample. I don't even know if these exist anymore, but yes, no DVDs. We still have this on here and I keep thinking, do people still send DVDs?
Marshall, I'm going to answer your question. Production design image, do you mean like concept, like mood board material? Exactly. So if you have created a mood board or a deck, this is where you would put it in this area of the application. And we love to see that stuff, especially if you haven't shot, like Erica was saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people do look at these kinds of things, particularly if you don't have any supporting material from the project. All right, next slide. Okay, see, we are at the end here, and we'll answer more questions. Can we add a deck to support materials if support materials can only be 5 pages? We want to make sure we limit the amount of supporting materials, because remember, these are getting reviewed by multiple people and we're having to pass things around. So try to keep your supporting materials to 5 pages. If the deck can fulfill that, great. If not, pick and choose the best stuff that you have. More is not always best, because at some point they are just going to pick the first couple things they see and be done with it if they see a lot of stuff. Again, it's optional for them, not required. Review, click submit. Those are the 2 big things, right? Please review the materials, particularly the uploaded documents. Make sure you have all those complete and they're the right ones before you hit submit. What we will not do is switch out things for you because you will have a better one, a better PDF or a new and improved PDF. We will deprioritize that. But if you are missing something when you submitted, we will try to comb through everyone's applications and see what we're missing and contact you. The turnaround time is quick. We're going to ask for it right away once you're contacted. So, you know, hopefully you have all those materials somewhere on your computer. But if you say forgot to upload the project timeline, Sarah will contact you and say, we need this by tomorrow. And hopefully you'll be able to submit that. But make sure it's all complete. And then it's kind of a wait. Be patient. Wait. September 2021 is when we will be announcing all of the awards and the decisions.
Just to get back to the additional support. So just, you know, if you really work with us in the spirit of what we're requesting, please don't kill yourself to meet the guidelines. Like if you have your deck in a single PDF and it's concise, it would be frustrating to get like a 20-page deck. But if you want to submit 2 letters of supporting material and then you want to submit a pitch deck that's very concise, you can do that. And we do prefer that, that you try to think within the guidelines of the 5, but if your deck is a few pages over, pushes you over, that's okay. It's not, please don't kill yourselves to meet that specific guideline, but just understand the spirit of it, and that we don't want a ton of stuff that adds a lot of extra time for our reviewer, but doesn't necessarily give more substance to your application.
Yes, we won't be counting those pages in that way for sure, but yeah. Yes, the recording is going to be made on our website. Like I said, you can watch it again and again and again if you want. 2 more, again, back to the webinars, 2 more that are very similar in style, but will focus on narratives and documentaries. And then Filmmaker Support at austinfilm.org is the place to go if you have any issues, questions, further questions. We will not look at materials ahead of time, just so that you know. We can't really help in that regard, but if you had just general questions that you weren't able to bring up here, or more clarifying questions, or if you have a technical issue, for sure, let us know. Technical issues are important for us to know, and Filmmaker Support gets answered very quickly.
Lori, so your deck might be too long for this. Can you use review comments and support material? Yes, let's say you got a review from the Academy Nickel Fellowship. Absolutely, if you want to include that as a page, that stuff is great. And also, if you've got your screenplay, they'll be looking at that. And then I forgot to mention one thing. We went over treatment and script. We do ask that you submit it even if you have already shot, which can be a little bit redundant, but just send us your shooting script or whatever is the most convenient thing for you to send. It's good for them to have. It's unlikely if we're able to watch a rough cut of your film in additional support, they may not read the script and watch the rough cut, but it does help if you're just submitting a few scenes. They'll absolutely read the script. So submit even if you have already shot.
Yeah.
And again, if you have any questions, please Filmmaker Support at austinfilm.org. Please do not call. Direct all questions to that email box. And we also will not have any updates on the whole review process until the award winners are announced in September. So just wanted to say that one more time.
But please get in touch if you think there's some significant changes or movement in your film. I think those are always super helpful for us. We will pass on the things that we think are most significant in the process to reviewers. You may think it's really significant, but maybe it's not really as significant in terms of the what they're looking at. But feel free to do that, particularly if you think it will help support your cause, or you've received funding, which is always from another source, which is always great when we hear those kinds of things, that it's getting some traction. Cool. Nice to see you all. I don't know if I don't see any more questions, but I have
any final questions. This was just really nice to hear your questions, and it's we're always happy to answer them. And thanks for hanging in with us, everybody.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see each other in person sometime in the near future. We usually do these in person, so it's been great being able to at least connect in this way, and great to see, like I said, new folks, new faces, and some old faces, and good luck. We really are looking forward to seeing your applications.
Okay, I'm going to answer one more question. How many $15,000 awards do you give out? Very few. So it's rare that you would get the full $15,000, because typically the panel is trying to split it up between more people. But we do often give awards of around $10,000 and above. $15,000 can be tricky, but it's you can get it's more common that we give out several $10,000 awards.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks,
all.
guys.